I'm Dave Cawley, the host of Cold. I am here with Amy Donaldson and Andrea Smardon from The Letter. Mm-hmm. And this is super cool, you guys, because when I listened to the Letter podcast, I was under the impression this was a one and done.
You and me both.
It was the story that had a beginning and an end, mm-hmm. and it was a great podcast. And I'll tell you, I've been watching people in this Facebook true crime group mm-hmm. discover The Letter. Mm. And talk about how different it is from other true crime shows. It does stand alone. But the big news here is there's a second season of The Letter.
Yes, but we didn't plan on that. As you know, Andrea moved on to another project, which she published, her Afghan refugee project. I moved on to a soccer project, and I have not yet published that. But yeah, we didn't intend to. I had a source, a former prosecutor, reach out to me maybe 5 or 6 episodes into season 1. And he said, hey, I have a kind of similar story. I don't know if you're going to be doing any more of these. And I said, no, we don't have any plans. And he emailed me a few details about it. And I thought it was interesting. And I thought, well, maybe we could do like a bonus episode. That would be an interesting thing to say, here's this other case where something similar happened, But I just thought we don't want to do the same podcast over. And there's only one letter, right? So I think I mentioned it to Cheryl, and she kind of agreed with me. Cheryl's our boss. And then just in email communication, he emailed me back and said, you're not going to believe this, but this is the story that inspired the Snars. And the Snars are one of the families from season 1. And then I was more interested in talking to the family. And so I gave one of the sisters of one of the murder victims a call. And really liked her and really thought the story was intriguing. But again, it's not The Letter. And at the end of the phone call, she said, oh, by the way, we have a letter too. And I was like, what? So that's how it all began. And Andrea, when this was going on, was in the middle of trying to do everything on her podcast. She did writing, producing, everything on her own podcast. And so wasn't, I don't know how you felt about it. I mean, The Letter season 1 was exhausting, and we were tired.
It was, but I have to say, when we started talking about doing a season 2, I was actually surprised that I wanted to.
Yes.
So I thought, it was it seemed like such a one-time experience, and I made an exception. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's a true crime story, but it's different. Mm-hmm. And there's this forgiveness thread and this redemption thread, and it moved so many people. And I was surprised by how I was affected by the listeners' reactions to it. You would hear how it would impact people, and they would start questioning their own lives, what they were doing with forgiveness in their own lives, or putting themselves in the place of these characters. And it really affected people. And I found that as a producer to be super rewarding.
Yeah. And I think
it seemed like it was really having an impact.
And that's as a journalist, we do this work so that we have an impact on the world, right? We want to affect change or inspire people or educate people. And we got in real time, as the podcast was rolling out, people are telling us this is the specific way. It's not just made me think, but it's changing my life.
Right.
I mean, we had some, even just a couple of months ago, really, really profound. I've spent many a day crying, and it really has been a lifeline to a lot of people who are struggling with, grief and loss and sort of the anger that comes with that, and what do you do with that? And yeah, I think we just didn't. I think I thought I understood forgiveness before we did The Letter, and I think we had a lot of conversations about, what does this mean? What does that mean? And I don't know that I ever had those conversations with anyone in my life before we started trying to write about it. And you realize how shallow your understanding of something is when you start doing that. But to the true crime thing, funny enough, before Andrea and we got hired at the same time, and before we got jobs here, we would go for walks, and she would tell me about her projects, and I would tell her about mine. And I was working on The Letter when I was still a print reporter. And she's like, I would never want to do a true crime. But she would give me great advice, right? So it was kind of funny. But yeah, I resisted being in the true crime universe because I knew it wasn't like what I was listening to. I'm not giving people this, inside view of the system, or I'm not doing investigative work. So what am I giving them? And that, I think that was sort of always, and it's been our sort of guiding light and our struggle in the second season is what are we giving you that we didn't already give you?
So let's dig into that a little more, because the letter season 1, for somebody who hasn't listened, let's start there.
Go listen.
What we don't want to
go
spoiler
listen.
obviously the whole.
You really need to listen to season 1 before season 2. And it's not because I think you need some understanding of the system or forgiveness or anything like that, or life in Utah. It's I think there is a connection, and we're going to explore it, and it will be more meaningful if you have made that journey in season 1.
So briefly summarize for me then what season 1 is, and then we'll talk about how that in detail jumped into what season 2 is about.
So season 1, in 1996, there were 2 18-year-old kids, Yvette Rodier and Zach Snar. They went up to Little Dell Reservoir to take some pictures of the moon, and a 19-year-old young man approached them and asked for directions, I believe, and ended up shooting both of them, really for no reason. And then Zach was killed. Yvette, I think she was shot 5 times. I don't know that we ever got a definitive.
For sure.
Yeah. But she crawled up to the road and flagged somebody down and ended up surviving. And really the story was just following them and their families afterward. And what ends up happening is that George reaches out through intermediaries to both Yvette and to Size and Ron, Zach's dad, to see if they would like a letter that he had written them. And really the podcast explores like what leads them to that, why they do or don't accept the letter, and then what happens after that. And so one of the things that does happen is in, I believe it's episode 5, a friend of Size, their LDS are at church, they're going to church, and says, I'm going to talk about this murder victim friend I know, and I just didn't want to offend you because she knows that she's really struggled with the loss of her son. And so I said, I'm not, I'm really interested. I want to hear what you have to say. And it was like, again, sharing your stories can be really helpful. That's why we do what we do, right? And yeah, it was kind of a moment where she said, I want to do something different in my life. And we didn't really even explore what that story was. We didn't worry about it because, there were other things that we were focused on. And so, yeah, when I found out that this was a story, it wasn't told by anyone in the family of, in this season, you have a double homicide in 1982 at Log Haven Restaurant, which, is a really sort of high-end restaurant.
Swanky. Yeah, nice.
And a wedding venue in Mill Creek Canyon, my favorite place to run with my dogs. That was my biggest challenge, Andrea telling me I couldn't write an essay on the amazing hiking and snowshoeing and skiing in Mill Creek Canyon. But
stay focused on the story,
Amy. She's like, Amy, no one cares about this. But it is a different canyon if people come here and know about skiing. Like Mill Creek is not like Big Cottonwood or Little Cottonwood. And so anyway, it's, for people who don't live here, it's one canyon over. It's handled by the same police agencies. Most
the incident in the first.
Yeah, the incident in the first one. And so in this case, a 25-year-old man's arrested for these 2 murders, and there is some parallels. There's a lot that's different. These are 2 young fathers who are killed, so they leave children. And it being an older case, I think the thing that intrigued me, besides the fact that there was a letter involved, was that I said to Andrea. I think it's kind of interesting, like the Snars situation and Yvette, like it felt so new and so fresh. Like it felt like they were sort of grappling with this just a few years before we reached out to them. And these families, this was decades ago. So the kids they had kids. What was that like? That was just a lot that I really wondered might be different. And yeah, once we got into it, there were a lot of other questions that came up, and I was like, well, I have a different, now we're doing this. And Andrea's like, no, stay focused. But
but there were some really intriguing questions to pursue that were different from the first season, because you do have this next generation that was affected before they were young enough to understand their loss. They may not have even, some of them don't even know or remember their fathers.
Yes.
But the loss is a huge impact on their lives. And so we started thinking about like how you inherit the trauma from your parents, right?
Yeah.
But then what happens if your parents forgive?
Yeah.
Then,
or don't forgive. Like what is
or don't forgive. Yeah, what then do you inherit?
Yeah,
right?
like what is that emotional inheritance versus this thing? We all kind of acknowledge that if somebody has a bad thing happen to them, like it kind of ripples through your family, right? But what about the other decisions you make. And anybody who's a parent, which Andrea and I both are, is the things you do impact your kids, whether you meant that to happen or not. And our parents, like, you have these experiences. So we were kind of like, let's explore this. Like, it seemed really simple at the beginning. And it became
Turns out it's not
pretty
simple.
complicated. Yeah. And it's been, I keep thinking like, oh, okay, now I get it. And then something will happen where I'm like, oh, I think this is going to keep evolving, And I think it's really wonderful that we actually brought in an editor from outside KSL to help us. And one of the things she said, I think she was kind of struggling with why we were doing this, because you hear true crime, and again, everybody keeps trying to put us in this box, and Andrea and I are like, no, that's not, we're the letter.
It's different.
Well, but let's talk about that. The letter does something different than a lot of true crime shows do. It's not Amy and Andrea gab about the latest headline case, right? You're looking at the long tail, long after the crime has happened, what goes on in these families, what happens to the survivors. Yeah. And with the letter season 2, you're now expanding that, as you said, into generations, right? And tracing that. And so you are like decades on from the crime. It's not so much Amy's trying to solve the case, but it's let's see what this does farther and farther down the line. Yeah.
The way I described it to the editor we were working with, and she's been amazingly helpful, is that, true crime is here. And then these emotional, podcasts about how I felt about something are up here. And we try to live right in between. So we give you this, sort of, I call it, because I'm a former sports writer, X's and O's, the plays, what happens. But what we really want to sink you into and have you experience is the emotion that comes out of it. But we try not to tip into philosophy, right? So it's this weird space. I really easily go to philosophy. And then we had a producer that was really wanting to be in the X's and O's. And it can be really hard to stay in that little space in between. Andrea's amazing at come back, children, herding cats, as we say. Because it is there's, especially with a crime, there's so many rabbit holes to go down. Oh, did you read this document? I mean, I don't know the hours that our former producer who left, and Nina and I went down. I've learned a lot about legal process that I covered courts and crime and corrections for 8 years, and I didn't know. So and then there's another connection. So that I was after I kind of figured out that we might be doing this season. My husband comes home from work one day, and I said, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. I think we might be doing a season 2 of the letter. And he's like, really? Yeah. I said, there was this double homicide in 1982 at Log Haven. And he holds up his hand and says, I know that case. I was the defense lawyer.
Because your husband is?
Ed Brass.
Defense
attorney. That was fun. I was like, oh no, don't tell me anymore.
No. Can we do this podcast?
Because he starts telling me, I was like, oh, we need that quote on tape. Stop. So I let Cheryl and Andrea know, and we went in a different studio and recorded our discussion about, because being a daily news, we've all worked daily news.
Yep.
If your spouse is involved in something, you're out. I mean, really, you
can't do the story.
Yeah, it's a conflict of interest. I can't cover cases that Ed's involved. You can't write about things that your husband's researching. You can't. If you have a personal connection, even in sports, I wouldn't cover a game my kid was playing, right? Although I hear that has gone out the window these days. We just had a discussion about what are we doing? Is this news? How does this work? What should we do? And I've heard in podcasts before where people kind of incorporate their personal connection to the story. And that's kind of what we decided to do. We kind of just split the baby. We've split a lot of babies this season. We're getting really good at being King Solomon. But Andrea interviewed my husband for the initial interview and kind of got the whole, what is he going to give us? But he's the only surviving member of Michael's defense team. And so, Andrea, how was that in interviewing Ed?
I'm giving an interview.
Did the age of the story, I mean, because you are looking at that multi-generational aspect, you have to interview not only that first round, like the immediate family, but then on to kids. So you're getting a broader and broader group as you go into this next generation. Did that present challenges in the storytelling, trying to figure out who holds the floor at any given time?
Well, I think the larger cast of characters was really challenging for like an audio story. And everybody keeps telling me I can't have so many people in my story, which is always like, I'm trying to put some more people in there. And so, yeah, that was a challenge. And honestly, this genius next to me figured out that, like, solved the problem. I don't even remember. We'd been struggling. We were, I don't know, 6 episodes in. I was like having meltdowns on the regular. This isn't working. This stinks. I hate everyone. And one day she called me and said, I think I figured it out. And like we rearranged some things. Yeah, in fact, I had been working on something for solid 5 days. And she's like, you might be mad at me, but we're going to do, you know how you wanted, I had wanted to do something. She's like, you know how you want to do that? We're going to do that. And I was like, I'm relieved. And also I want to cry. But like the rearranging, and the one thing she helped figure out is like, how do you tell this next generation story? Because if I start you off with 13 people, you're just going to be like, I can't keep track of anyone. And yeah, and I want you to kind of understand there's like these threads and they all matter. But if you give everyone the huge thing at the beginning, huge ball of yarn, it just looks like a mess. So we had to make it into something that was, you could
follow the threads.
Yeah. In fact, even some of the moments we were like, we just revamped. We didn't tell our boss until this morning that we changed the ending of one episode because I was like, there's just too much. I can't take, I need, the reason we feel like there's 3 endings is because there's too much. These are heavy things, right? Heavy topics. And so you need to sit in them.
But long story short, we decided to give the next generation their own episode. And it doesn't happen till late in the podcast. But you've been hearing about them all along being described as children by their parents.
Yeah.
And then you finally get to meet them
as
adults. And it sort of brings us up to the present because they are still dealing with this.
Yes.
Like it doesn't end.
And really, I think that's the moral of the story for everyone. Even as I told you, we've been letting them, like I played them the trailer a couple weeks ago and the first episodes. And yeah, to hear your story told like in a podcast like this is an experience. I don't know many people who would have it, but it's been hard and great for them. Like they're, and you know, interestingly, so there are 5 kids who lost their dads on that day, 3 in one family, 2 in the other. And one of the oldest son of Jordan Rasmussen, who was 32 when he was killed, he initially didn't want to participate and just decided to participate the very week that we were listening to the episode on the kids. And I called everyone all excited, like, you're not going to believe this. It's amazing. It's going to be so much better. And also we had to...
We have to redo the episode.
It's a giant bomb. Yeah, blows it up.
But yeah, I had felt like something was missing. And it just, honestly, it was like I found the missing piece of the puzzle. And I have felt that way a few times. And it's been, yeah, people have been so generous. And I think that it's going to be, I think it'll be different and a deeper experience in a lot of ways, I think, especially if you went through season 1. I think you will have the kind of experience we had, which is sort of this deepening of this understanding of grief and healing and how you rebuild your lives and what your decisions do or don't do. And the thing that's really interesting is just how different everyone, like there's not a single experience. But yeah, it's been it is an emotional journey. I will say that. And
I would say it's a different kind of mystery. Like like when we're thinking about the differences with classic true crime, the mystery is not like who did it or where's the body. Yeah. But it's more like how do people come to these decisions, and then what is the impact like decades later? Yeah. And I think the thing that's interesting about this too is like I felt like Mark Moffat was amazing in season 1, and the attorney that represented George, like they play a really vital role. But in this case, like they're having an experience that not a lot of people have
in working in the system.
The attorneys.
And so and for some people, when one of the attorneys has that experience, it's kind of disorienting. They're like, wait a second, this is not how it's supposed to go.
It kind of changes their worldview. I mean,
and I think everyone's like, these things are supposed to be like black and white.
The attorneys are like fixed in their views on the death penalty or whatever,
or anything, or
criminal
did you do
justice,
it, or why, or what do people deserve, or does the system actually rehabilitate people? Like all these questions are things that most of these guys like come out of law school feeling one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
And that's all gets mixed up.
it challenges everybody.
Yeah. And I'm excited. One of the bonus episodes that we're going to have is my husband's perspective on some of these types of moments in court and just how really rare they are.
Okay, you say bonus episodes. Before we talk bonus, when does this drop? Where do people find it?
Drops April 16th, and they can find it anywhere they get their podcasts. Apple, Spotify, I think
Amazon, all those.
everything, yeah. And you can go to the letterpodcast.com. There will be stories there and the audio.
And free to catch up on the letter season 1.
You can do that right now.
You can binge it.
Yep, you can binge it right now, and it's free. And I just like to say this because there was a little hiccup last time. People thought they had to pay. You don't. You have to pay for a membership with Lemonada. They're our national distributing partner. And so they have a membership that's like $5 a month, and that allows you to get the bonus episodes.
Okay. And what will the bonus episodes look like? Are they coming out alongside?
So every time an episode drops, a bonus episode will also drop. So next week you'll get episode 1 and bonus episode 1.
Okay.
And so
that's on April 16th.
April 16th, yes. And so the bonus episode for this first week is a little insight and some details that I really wanted to put in the podcast, but it would have made it. We would have had to introduce another couple people, and sort of the business aspect of this murder that is super complicated. And so we chose not to put it in the first episode. But this friend of Jordan's, one of the murder victims, had some pretty interesting details and insight into Jordan. So that's that episode. And of course, I overrode it. Aaron was like, "You don't have to do all this for bonus." And I'm like, people who get my bonus episodes are basically getting another episode.
But to the point, if somebody's listening to the letter season 2, episode 1, and they're really compelled, they can buy that subscription.
You can have more detail
to Lemonada and go deeper, and you'll get that every week.
Every single week. And sometimes it's going to be more, it'll be an extra interview that we did with someone about issues that are raised, like you did this with Cold. When you're telling a narrative style podcast, you can't like take it aside and talk 10 minutes about why, jobs, prison, like Utah correctional industries, how come prisoners only make $1 or, 70 cents or whatever it is. And like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And how does the state make all this money? And, the ethics of prisoner labor and really the safety of prisoner labor, right? Like if I have a company, do I want to...
All the things I wouldn't let Amy talk about in the podcast.
Basically, if you pay for the bonus content, you get the podcasts I would have done. No, just kidding.
Well, I understand now, though, why the both of you have seemed very hair on fire for the last little while.
Yes.
You've had a lot to do.
Well, and I will say, Andrea is like, we're the same about bonus content in our profession. Sometimes bonus content is just like, I have this extra interview. Like I've listened to bonus and it's like an unedited interview between a police officer and a suspect. And I'm like, I do not want to listen to, there are people who do an hour and 40 minute, I've had to sit through those for a story. So I feel like it should enhance, like you should get some details or some stories or some understanding or some insight that if we were just doing a straight journalism podcast, we might have included, but because we're telling a story, we can't include. And so that's really what we're trying to do in the bonus episodes. And I think we have some really, really great stuff if we can pull it off.
Well, I'm super excited for you both. I've had a chance to listen to part of the season in rough draft form, so I got to re-listen now to hear the finished product.
Yeah, because some of your suggestions are in there.
Well, that's very kind.
I know. Dave
some
is
of them
terrible.
have been bad, so throw
Dave
most
said,
of those out.
You should rewrite this entire thing. And I was like, wow, why is he here? Can we fire this guy?
And then half the time I'm like, dang, he's right.
I know. I'm like, no, these two cannot talk. No.
Give as good as you get, right?
I know. I'll never forget though, like when you looked at me, because I was doing it, and this is another kind of inside journalism thing. When you cover crime, there is this idea that to make people care about something that happens, they have to understand who it's happening to. And probably that's with policy. I felt that way about all my journalism. Like it's not the issue, it's the people. But really for me, it's like, it's just, I couldn't be a journalist if I couldn't do it. And so, but Dave leans across the table to me when I was like arguing, no. And they're like, this doesn't make sense. And I was like, let me do what I want. I hate you all. And Dave said, Amy, listen to me. I did what you want to do. And it's not the right thing to do. And it's not the right thing for the people that you're writing about, right? Because our effort to try to make you understand, sometimes it's too much, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that has been hard about narrative storytelling, especially in audio, is it's such a difficult shift from regular journalism. Like it's just, you can't, I mean, we'll even say things like, oh, this is our reporter instinct here. Like when we want attribution for things, and Cheryl's like, I don't want all this stuff in there, because we want to tell you where we got the information, right? That's what you would do as a journalist. Yeah, it's hard. But yeah, I have loved these families. They're super generous with their time and their experiences. And when you listen, which I hope you all do, you will. They're just amazing people. All of them. They made, like I said, all different experiences, decisions. Some humans are amazing. It is very affirming. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I felt like, yeah, I love working on this project, especially when there's so much crummy stuff happening.
Well, you're about to embark on a journey, and we will come back together in a few weeks and see how it's going.
Yes.
And do an update, and hopefully you'll be a little less...
We'll see if I manage to actually do my hair for that video. Hair and makeup by Amy's in a Hurry.
We're still finishing the podcast, so it actually is a mystery to us how it's going to end.
Yeah. You want to say, when should we come back? When we figure out an ending, we'll schedule another interview. But
I can't spoil the ending I don't know. So.
That's it. Yeah, as I said, it's right there, and you don't want to be in here right now. Andrew doesn't even want to be in proximity to this.
Well, we'll do it again in a few weeks, and congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.